It was billed as a monumental victory, a landmark trade deal with Japan, securing massive investment and slashing tariffs. But as the ink dried, the celebration in Washington was drowned out by a roar of fury from America's own industrial heartland. From Detroit, the heads of GM, Ford, and Stellantis cried foul, warning of an impending collapse. The deal, meant to prove American strength, had just handed a massive advantage to their biggest foreign competitors. How did a diplomatic triumph trigger the overnight implosion of the US auto industry? For more than half a century, the American and Canadian auto industries weren't just partners, they were a single, integrated powerhouse. The 1965 Auto Pact erased the border for cars and parts, creating a seamless manufacturing ecosystem that stretched from the American Midwest to southern Ontario. This pact became the blueprint for the North American Free Trade Agreement, or NAFTA, which turned the continent into a fortress of shared production, a model of efficiency built on mutual trust. That trust was systematically dismantled by the Trump administration's America First doctrine. The White House viewed this intricate integration not as a shared strength, but as a system that had allowed Canada and Mexico to thrive at America's expense. The first shots were fired with punishing tariffs on North American steel and aluminum, sometimes as high as 50%, and a looming 25% tariff on finished automobiles built in Canada or Mexico. The justification was always the protection of the American worker. The White House argued that these tariffs were a necessary weapon to force its neighbors to stop offshoring American jobs. Washington was convinced that as the world's largest consumer market, it held all the cards. It believed that by threatening to cut off access, it could force its partners to bend to its will. The stage was set for a confrontation, but no one in Detroit imagined the administration's next move would be to reward a foreign competitor while punishing its own team. On July 23, 2025, the Trump administration unveiled what it framed as a masterstroke of its America First trade doctrine. After months of tense negotiations, the White House announced a landmark trade agreement with Japan. The deal was presented as a monumental win, a testament to the power of President Trump's bilateral, transactional approach to foreign policy. The terms were, on their face, impressive. The US agreed to slash its threatened tariffs on Japanese automobiles from a potential 27.5% down to a flat, manageable 15%. This was a significant concession designed to stabilize a critical trade relationship with a key Asian ally. But the real headline, the centerpiece of the deal, was the immense prize secured in return. Japan committed to a staggering $550 billion in new investment directly into the United States. This wasn't a vague promise. It was a targeted fund with investments earmarked for high-tech sectors crucial to American competitiveness: semiconductors, AI, and pharmaceuticals. To sweeten the pot further, Japan also committed to purchasing more Boeing aircraft and increasing its defense spending with American contractors. The message from Washington was clear: this is how you make a deal. It was a complete package designed to show the world that America could use its economic might to bring massive investment home. The administration portrayed it as the perfect model for future negotiations, a demonstration of leverage that would put other negotiating partners on notice. It was meant to be a show of force. But the celebration in Washington was immediately drowned out by a roar of fury from America's own industrial heartland. Instead of applause, the deal was met with utter disbelief and rage from the big three US automakers: General Motors, Ford, and Stellantis, and the unions that represented their workers. Their anger stemmed from a glaring, and to them, disastrous inconsistency. While a car built in Japan would now face a 15% tariff, a car built in their own factories in Canada or Mexico, the heart of their North American production system, was still subject to a punishing 25% tariff. In an instant, the US government had made it cheaper to import a car from a foreign competitor than to build one within its own continental partnership. The American Automotive Policy Council, which represents the Detroit Giants, was livid. Its president, Matt Blunt, issued a scathing statement declaring any deal that provides lower tariffs for Japanese vehicles with very low U.S. content is a bad deal for American industry and American workers. The United Auto Workers Union echoed the sentiment, releasing a statement that accused the administration of leaving American workers behind in favor of Japanese interests. They saw it as a profound betrayal. For years, they had been told that tariffs were necessary to protect their jobs from unfair competition. Now, those same policies were being used to give a foreign competitor a leg up. The industrial heartland wasn't just angry, it felt abandoned. This sense of betrayal created a full-blown crisis in Detroit. The phrase overnight collapse began to circulate, not as a literal event, but as a reflection of the sudden, shocking evaporation of their competitive footing. The financial damage was immediate. General Motors reported a staggering loss of around $1 billion in the second quarter, directly tied to tariff pressures. Stellantis hemorrhaged an estimated $2.7 billion in the first half of the year. The White House had created a strategic nightmare for its own domestic champions. They were now being actively undercut in their home market, not by a competitor's innovation, but by their own government's trade deal. This set a dangerous precedent, signaling to other major players like the EU and South Korea that the path to preferential treatment from the US was to offer up massive investment deals, a model that would consistently penalize the highly integrated North American system. The administration, in its quest for a flashy diplomatic victory, had fractured its relationship with its own industrial base and handed its biggest competitors the keys to the kingdom. To understand the rage in Detroit, you have to understand the reality in a city like Windsor, Ontario. The workers in this plant don't consider themselves foreign competitors. They are, for all intents and purposes, part of the Detroit ecosystem. For decades, they have built the cars that fill American showrooms. Their jobs and livelihoods completely intertwined with their American counterparts across the river. The North American system was built on this very idea, that a worker in Windsor was a partner to a worker in Michigan. The US-Japan deal obliterated that principle. Suddenly, these Canadian workers, integral cogs in the GM, Ford, and Stellantis machines, were being treated as hostile actors. The cars they build were slapped with a 25% tariff, while cars from Japan, with far less North American content, were given a pass at 15%. This is the core of the problem. For US automakers, their Canadian and Mexican plants aren't just facilities. They are essential, specialized parts of a continental assembly line. A decision that penalizes these plants is a decision that penalizes the entire company. The Japan deal effectively punished American companies for investing in the North American partnership. It created a bizarre incentive structure where a company would be better off sourcing a car from overseas than from its own integrated supply chain. The deal didn't just hurt Canadian workers, it destabilized the entire business model of the American auto industry, turning a decades-long partnership into a sudden and severe liability. The blowback from the Japan deal hit the American heartland like a tidal wave. The financial losses were staggering, a $1 billion hit for GM, a $2.7 billion blow for Stellantis. This wasn't just a paper loss, it translated into immediate and severe consequences. The sudden competitive advantage for Japanese imports threatened to crater sales of North American-built vehicles, risking thousands of jobs in states like Michigan and Ohio. The UAW's fury was palpable because its members could see the writing on the wall. Fewer sales of American cars means fewer shifts on the assembly line. The very workers the president had promised to protect were now the primary victims of his signature deal. The cost was also passed directly to the American consumer. With Japanese imports now significantly cheaper from a tariff perspective, US automakers were left with an impossible choice: absorb the massive losses or raise prices on their own vehicles to compensate. This meant that the American family looking to buy a new car was now facing higher prices, all as a direct result of a government policy that favored a foreign nation's auto industry over its own. The America First strategy had devolved into a circular firing squad, a deal celebrated in the Rose Garden as a masterstroke of diplomacy was being felt in the showrooms of the Midwest as a devastating act of economic self-harm. A diplomatic victory designed to showcase American strength has backfired, triggering a crisis of confidence in its own industrial heartland. By rewarding Japan while penalizing its North American partners, the White House has ignited a firestorm of fury from Detroit, destabilized its own auto industry, and betrayed the very workers it vowed to protect. The administration is now at war with itself. In the race to define the future, will North America win together, or will both nations lose by trying to go it alone? Are you American or Canadian? Share your story and your perspective in the comments below.